My name is Sue, and at 57, I thought I had life figured out. After 32 years of marriage to David, our suburban home felt like a sanctuary with my beloved rose garden greeting me each morning. Sure, I'd been feeling more tired lately, and my husband and daughter-in-law, Sarah, seemed increasingly worried about my health, but I attributed it to age. Life felt peaceful, predictable, even blessed. But what I overheard that Tuesday evening changed everything I thought I knew about my life. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next will shock you to your core, and you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Let me paint you the picture of what my life looked like before everything crumbled. David and I met in college when we were both young and full of dreams. He was studying business while I pursued education, and we fell in love over late-night study sessions and shared ambitions. After graduation, we married and built what I believed was a solid foundation together. David worked his way up to become a successful insurance executive, while I found fulfillment as a part-time librarian, spending my free time tending to my garden and volunteering at the local community center. Our son Michael was the pride and joy of our marriage. Now, 28 and working as an engineer, he had grown into a thoughtful, caring man who still came for Sunday dinners with his wife Sarah. She was 26, beautiful, and seemed like the perfect daughter-in-law when Michael brought her home 2 years ago. Sarah was always polite, always asking about my day, always offering to help with dishes after family meals. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where children played safely in tree-lined streets, and where the biggest excitement was the annual block party. I had created routines that brought me joy: morning coffee while watching the sunrise over my roses, afternoon walks around the local park evening, reading sessions curled up in my favorite chair by the window. But recently, things had started to feel different. The headaches came first subtle, at first, then more persistent. Sometimes I'd experience dizzy spells that left me gripping the kitchen counter until they passed. David noticed immediately, his concern touching but somehow overwhelming. He'd ask repeatedly if I was feeling all right, suggesting I sit down, rest more, take things easier. Sarah joined in this chorus of worry, often calling to check on me or stopping by unexpectedly to see how I was doing. At first, I appreciated their attention. It felt like love, like care from the two most important people in my son's life. But as weeks passed, I began to notice something else. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, concerned glances, exchanged over my head during family dinners, and a general atmosphere of walking on eggshells around me. David had always been attentive, but his behavior shifted into something more intense. He started tracking my movements more carefully, asking detailed questions about where I'd been, what I'd done, whether I remembered specific conversations or events. When I'd misplace my keys or forget a minor detail, he'd get this look in his eyes, not annoyance, but something that felt almost like satisfaction. The first real warning sign came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had returned home early from the library due to a staff meeting being canceled, and I found David hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table. As I approached to greet him, I caught a glimpse of his screen before he quickly minimized the window. The web page header read, "Early Onset Dementia Warning Signs and Symptoms." My blood ran cold, but David's explanation came smoothly. "Oh, that's just research for a colleague at work. Poor guy's wife has been showing some concerning signs, and he asked me to look into it for him." His smile seemed genuine, his tone casual, but something felt off about the entire interaction. The following week, Sarah began making subtle suggestions during our conversations. "Sue, you've been looking tired lately. Maybe you should take things easier, focus more on resting." She'd bring up stories about other women our age who had discovered health issues early and benefited from prompt medical attention. "Prevention is so important at our stage of life," she'd say with that caring smile that I was beginning to question. David's behavior became increasingly protective, almost suffocating. He started insisting on driving me to the library instead of letting me take my usual pleasant walk. He'd call my workplace to check if I'd arrived safely, something he'd never done in 3 decades of marriage. When I questioned this new level of oversight, he'd brush off my concerns with comments about wanting to take better care of me as we got older. The appointment request blindsided me completely. David announced over breakfast one morning that he'd scheduled a comprehensive checkup with Dr. Martinez for the following week. "Just routine stuff, honey, but I think it's important we stay on top of your health," he said, not meeting my eyes as he spoke. "I didn't ask for an appointment," I replied, feeling a flutter of irritation. "I feel fine, David. These headaches are probably just stress." "That's exactly why we need to check," he insisted. "Sometimes we can't see things about ourselves that others notice." That phrase stuck with me. Others notice. What had others noticed that I couldn't see about myself? I began paying closer attention to conversations around me, catching fragments of discussions between David and Sarah that seemed to center around my well-being. They spoke in hushed tones about her condition and what's best for everyone involved. My longtime friends seemed to be calling less frequently. When I mentioned this to David, he suggested they were probably just busy with their own families and responsibilities. "People our age have a lot on their plates," he reasoned. But the isolation felt deliberate, calculated in a way that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Had I forgotten that conversation about changing our grocery store? Did I really leave the stove on last Tuesday, or was David mistaken? Were my headaches actually more serious than I thought? The doubt crept in slowly but persistently, making me question my own perceptions and memories. That Tuesday evening changed everything. I had stayed late at the library to help with the children's reading program, but a sudden thunderstorm forced us to close early. Instead of calling David for a ride, I decided to make a quick dash to my car and drive home through the rain. The storm was fierce, with lightning illuminating the dark streets and thunder rolling overhead like an ominous warning. I arrived home soaked, but relieved to be safely inside. The house felt unusually quiet, and I assumed David was in his office working late as he often did. I was heading upstairs to change into dry clothes when I heard his voice coming from the partially open office door. He was speaking in a tone I rarely heard, businesslike, calculated, cold. "2 more weeks and we can have her committed," he said clearly into his phone. "The documentation is almost complete, and Dr. Martinez has agreed to sign off on the evaluation." My legs turned to jelly. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, straining to hear every word, while my heart pounded so loudly I was afraid it might give me away. The voice responding from the phone speaker was unmistakable. Sarah's voice, my daughter-in-law, discussing my fate as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a human being they claimed to love. "Michael still doesn't suspect anything, does he?" Sarah asked, her voice tinny but clear through the speaker. "No, he just thinks we're being extra careful about his mother's health. He's actually grateful for our attention to the situation," David replied, with what sounded like satisfaction. My mind reeled. Committed. They were planning to have me committed to some kind of facility, and they were doing it behind my son's back. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my knees buckle. "What about the financial aspects?" Sarah's voice continued. "The trust fund from her father transfers to Michael if something happens to her mental capacity, right?" David's laugh was chilling. "The trust fund is worth $800,000 plus her life insurance policy. If she's declared mentally incompetent, I become the executor of everything, since Michael doesn't understand these legal complexities yet." The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't about my health or well-being. This was about money, about stealing my inheritance and my freedom for their financial gain. The headaches, the dizziness, the memory issues I'd been experiencing, had they been manufacturing these symptoms somehow? "The facility you found looks perfect," Sarah continued. "Private, discreet, and far enough away that visiting would be challenging for anyone who might ask questions." "Exactly," David agreed. "Once she's there, we can focus on what really matters, Our future together. Our future together. The words hit me like a slap. David and Sarah. My husband and my daughter-in-law. Not only were they plotting to steal my life and freedom, they were having an affair. I stood frozen in that hallway for what felt like hours, listening to them discuss details of their plan with the casual efficiency of people planning a vacation. They talked about forged medical records, manipulated testimony, and legal precedents for involuntary commitment. They had researched everything prepared for every contingency. The conversation eventually ended, and I heard David moving around his office. Panic seized me as I realized I needed to get upstairs before he discovered me eavesdropping. I made it to the bedroom just as his footsteps began ascending the stairs, my mind spinning with the devastating knowledge I just acquired. That night, lying next to David in our bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. This man I had loved and trusted for 32 years was planning to destroy my life, steal my inheritance, and betray our son's trust. And he was doing it with the woman our son loved, the woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms. The next few days passed in a surreal haze as I began investigating the full scope of their conspiracy. When David left for a business trip to Chicago, I seized the opportunity to search through his office systematically. What I found made my blood run cold. Hidden in a locked file cabinet, the key kept in his desk drawer where he thought I'd never look, were dozens of documents related to involuntary psychiatric commitment procedures. Legal forms, medical evaluation templates, and research printouts about establishing mental incompetence filled an entire folder labeled SM Personal. The initials were mine, but seeing my life reduced to a file folder felt dehumanizing. David's laptop revealed even more damning evidence. Email exchanges with Sarah, dating back 6 months, showed the evolution of their plan. The earliest messages focused on their growing attraction to each other, but within weeks the conversation had shifted to my declining mental state and how they might help me by ensuring I received proper care. One email from Sarah particularly chilled me. David, I've been thinking about what you said regarding Sue's inheritance. If we can establish that she needs professional mental health care, wouldn't that protect everyone's interests? Michael would be so grateful for our taking charge of a difficult situation. David's response showed how calculated this entire scheme had become. I've researched the legal requirements thoroughly. We need documented evidence of erratic behavior, medical professional recommendations, and family testimony about safety concerns. The trust fund would transfer to Michael's control, but as his stepmother, you'd naturally have significant influence over those decisions. They had contacted Dr. Martinez months before I ever experienced any symptoms, planting seeds about their concerns for my mental health. David had scheduled consultations with 3 different attorneys about estate planning and involuntary commitment procedures. They had even toured Serenity Acres, a private psychiatric facility 2 hours away that specialized in long-term residential care for challenging cases. The most horrifying discovery was a bottle of prescription medication hidden behind books in David's office. The label showed my name and a medication called haloperidol, prescribed by a doctor I'd never heard of. Research on David's computer showed this was an antipsychotic drug that could cause confusion, memory problems, and erratic behavior. Exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing. They had been drugging me. The headaches, the dizziness, the memory issues that had made me doubt myself. These were side effects of medication they'd been secretly giving me to manufacture evidence of mental illness. The coffee David brought me each morning, the supplements Sarah suggested I take for general health. It all made sense now. Text messages between David and Sarah revealed their affair in explicit detail, but also showed how they planned to manipulate Michael. Sarah was slowly poisoning my son's perception of me, making comments about my strange behavior, and suggesting that I might be developing some concerning patterns that required professional evaluation. Michael is starting to notice things, one of Sarah's messages read. I mentioned how his mom seemed confused during our last conversation, and he admitted he's been worried about some of her recent comments. He's actually relieved that we're keeping such a close eye on her." David's response was chilling. "Perfect." His testimony about noticing changes in his mother's behavior will be crucial when we present our case. He'll thank us later for taking such good care of her. They had created a timeline for the commitment process. The plan was to trigger a psychiatric emergency during a family gathering, have Dr. Martinez called for an evaluation, and use the combination of medical records, family testimony, and witness behavioral evidence to obtain an emergency commitment order. Once I was in the facility, they would work to make the arrangement permanent. The financial motive became crystal clear through spreadsheets on David's computer. My father's trust fund, currently worth $800,000, would transfer to Michael upon my death or mental incapacitation. My life insurance policy would pay out another $500,000 if I died while institutionalized. Combined with our joint assets, David and Sarah would effectively control over $1.5 million while eliminating the problem of my presence in their lives. The most devastating realization came when I discovered just how long this betrayal had been brewing and how thoroughly they had isolated me from any potential help. Their plan was set to culminate in just 10 days during Michael's birthday celebration at our house. I found detailed notes in Sarah's handwriting describing how she would provoke an incident during the party. She planned to contradict something I said in front of Michael and other guests, then escalate the disagreement until I appeared irrational and potentially dangerous. David would then express reluctant concern about my behavior and suggest that professional evaluation might be necessary for everyone's safety. Dr. Martinez, who had been receiving David's updates about my condition for months, was prepared to make a house call if needed. The commitment papers were already filled out, requiring only his signature and a witness statement from family members who had observed my disturbing behavior. I discovered that they had been systematically cutting me off from my support network. David had contacted my closest friends expressing concern about my mental state and suggesting that visits might be overwhelming for me during this difficult period. He had convinced my sister in Oregon that I was going through a rough patch and that he would keep her updated on my condition. Even my volunteer work at the community center had been sabotaged. David had spoken with the coordinator, suggesting that my recent health issues made it inappropriate for me to work with children or handle responsibilities that required mental sharpness. They had graciously given me an indefinite leave of absence to focus on my health. The most heartbreaking betrayal was seeing how they manipulated Michael. Text messages showed Sarah gradually introducing doubt about my behavior during their private conversations. She would mention little incidents, how I seemed confused about a date, how I repeated myself during phone calls, how I appeared distracted during family dinners. "I'm just worried about her," Sarah would text Michael. "Your dad is trying so hard to take care of everything, but I can see how exhausted he's getting. Maybe we should look into getting some professional help just to make sure everyone stays safe and healthy." Michael's responses showed his genuine love and concern for me, which made the manipulation even more cruel. "I've noticed Mom seems more tired lately," he wrote back. "I appreciate you and Dad looking out for her. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." They planned to present Michael with a united front, two people who loved him deeply, making a difficult decision for the good of everyone involved. By the time he realized what had really happened, it would be too late. I would be locked away in a facility diagnosed with a mental illness I didn't have while they controlled my finances, and slowly convinced him that this outcome was inevitable and merciful. The legal documents showed they had prepared for every contingency. If Michael objected to the commitment, they had statements from Dr. Martinez about my deteriorating condition and the danger I posed to myself and others. If I tried to fight the commitment, they had months of manufactured evidence about my erratic behavior and medical records showing a pattern of concerning symptoms. I sat in David's office chair, surrounded by the evidence of their elaborate betrayal, and felt something shift inside me. The helplessness and confusion I'd been experiencing gave way to something harder, more focused. They thought they were dealing with a mentally declining woman who would be easy to manipulate and control. They had no idea who they were really up against. I knew I had to be smarter than they were, and I had to move quickly. With only 10 days before their planned commitment, I needed to not only protect myself, but ensure they faced consequences for what they'd done. The first step was getting legal help without alerting them to my knowledge of their plan. I contacted Janet Morrison, a family attorney I'd heard about through library colleagues. Janet specialized in elder abuse and estate protection, and when I explained my situation, she was appalled but not surprised. "This happens more often than people realize," she told me grimly. "The combination of financial motive and family manipulation makes these cases particularly insidious." Janet helped me understand my legal options while we developed a strategy to gather undeniable evidence. We installed hidden recording devices in key areas of the house: the kitchen where David and Sarah often talked privately, his office, where he made phone calls, and the living room, where family gatherings took place. The next phase involved protecting my assets before they could be seized. Janet arranged for me to transfer my trust fund to a new account they couldn't access to change the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, and establish a new will that would prevent them from inheriting anything if their plan succeeded. I reached out to Dr. Rebecca Chen, an independent physician Janet recommended for a comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation. Dr. Chen's tests confirmed what I suspected. I was in excellent mental health, and blood work showed traces of haloperidol in my system. She documented everything thoroughly, creating medical evidence that would contradict any claims about my mental competence. The hardest part was reconnecting with my support network without alerting David and Sarah. I started with my sister Margaret in Oregon, calling her when David was at work and explaining the entire situation. Margaret was horrified and immediately flew out to help document everything and serve as a witness to my mental clarity. I carefully reached out to my closest friends, explaining how David had isolated me and asking for their help. Linda, my best friend from the library, was furious when she learned how David had manipulated her into staying away. "I knew something felt wrong about his explanations," she said, "but I trusted him because he's your husband." The evidence gathering became more systematic. I photographed all the documents in David's office, copied his computer files, and saved every text message and email I could access. Janet arranged for a private investigator to follow David and Sarah, documenting their affair and their meetings with Dr. Martinez and the psychiatric facility. Janet also helped me understand the commitment process they planned to use against me. In our state, emergency psychiatric holds required either law enforcement intervention for immediate danger or medical professional evaluation, with the family support for voluntary commitment. They were counting on Dr. Martinez's willingness to sign paperwork and Michael's trust in their judgment. The most delicate operation was preparing Michael for the truth without alerting Sarah. I started by having longer, more frequent conversations with my son, demonstrating my mental clarity and subtly asking about his relationship with Sarah. I could see he was genuinely happy with her, which made me sad for what this revelation would do to him. I arranged for Margaret to visit during a week when Sarah was traveling for work, giving Michael a chance to see me interacting normally with family without Sarah's influence. Margaret later told me that Michael had seemed surprised by how sharp and engaged I was, mentioning that Sarah had led him to expect more concerning behavior. The technical aspects of my counterplan required learning skills I'd never needed before. I taught myself to use recording apps on my phone to access David's computer when he was away, and to document evidence in ways that would be legally admissible. Janet connected me with a technology specialist who helped ensure we captured everything we needed. Meanwhile, I had to maintain the appearance of being the confused, declining woman they expected. I continued taking the medication they gave me, but induced vomiting afterward to minimize the effects. I played up confusion during certain conversations while ensuring my genuine mental clarity was documented by my real support team. The private investigator's surveillance revealed just how extensive their relationship had become. They met regularly at hotels, went on romantic dinners, when they told Michael and me they were working late and had been planning their future together for months. The investigator captured photos and videos that left no doubt about their affair. As the planned commitment date approached, I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. Everything had to go perfectly. If they suspected I knew about their plan, they might accelerate the timeline or change their strategy entirely. But I was no longer the isolated, confused victim they thought they were manipulating. I had become something they never expected, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The final confrontation came exactly as they had planned it, during Michael's birthday celebration at our house. But what David and Sarah didn't know was that everything was being recorded. Legal witnesses were standing by, and law enforcement had been alerted to the situation. I had invited several guests they weren't expecting: Margaret Linda, Dr. Chen, and Janet's legal assistant, who was present to document everything. When David questioned the additional guests, I explained I wanted to make Michael's birthday extra special since I'd been feeling so much better lately. The evening began normally with casual conversation and birthday cake. I played my part perfectly, appearing slightly confused about small details while demonstrating complete mental clarity about important matters. Sarah began her planned escalation by contradicting something I said about Michael's childhood, then suggesting I was mixing up memories again. But instead of becoming agitated as they expected, I remained calm and asked her to clarify what she meant. Margaret smoothly intervened to confirm my recollection, and Dr. Chen casually mentioned how common it was for people to remember events differently. Sarah's strategy was failing, but she pressed ahead, becoming more aggressive in her attempts to provoke me. "Sue, you've been so forgetful lately," Sarah said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Just yesterday you called me 3 times asking the same question. I'm worried about you." "That's interesting," I replied calmly. "According to my phone records, I haven't called you in over a week, but I'm sure there's a simple explanation for the confusion." David stepped in right on cue, expressing concern about my behavior and suggesting we should probably call Dr. Martinez to have me evaluated. "I think Sarah's right to be worried," he said with practiced reluctance. "Some of the things Sue has been saying and doing lately." That's when Janet's assistant stood up and announced that as an officer of the court, she needed to inform everyone present that this conversation was being recorded as evidence in an ongoing investigation of elder abuse and fraud. The room went silent. David and Sarah stared in shock as I calmly explained that I had discovered their plan to have me falsely committed, steal my inheritance, and continue their affair while destroying my son's family. I pulled out printed copies of their emails, text messages, and financial documents, spreading them on the coffee table for everyone to see. Michael's face went through a range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally rage as he read the evidence of their betrayal. The woman he loved and the stepfather he trusted had been systematically plotting against his mother while manipulating him into supporting their scheme. "This is ridiculous," Sarah tried to protest. "Sue is clearly having some kind of paranoid episode. David called Dr. Martinez right away." "I already spoke with Dr. Martinez," Dr. Chen interjected. "He's been arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud. We have recordings of David paying him to falsify medical records and sign commitment papers without proper evaluation." David's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand," he said desperately to Michael. "Your mother has been acting irrationally for months. We were trying to protect everyone to make sure she got the help she needs." "By drugging her with antipsychotic medication?" I asked, holding up the bottle I'd found in his office. "By forging medical records? By planning to steal $800,000 while I'm locked away in a psychiatric facility?" The police arrived exactly on schedule. Janet had coordinated with the district attorney's office to ensure David and Sarah were arrested simultaneously for fraud, elder abuse, attempted false imprisonment, and conspiracy. As they were led away in handcuffs, Sarah screamed that this was all a misunderstanding, while David stared at me with something like grudging respect. Michael sat in stunned silence, processing the destruction of everything he thought he knew about his marriage and family. I sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder as we watched his wife being arrested for plotting against his mother. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. With overwhelming evidence of their conspiracy, both David and Sarah pled guilty to multiple charges. David received a sentence of 5 to 8 years in prison for elder abuse fraud and conspiracy. Sarah received 3 to 5 years, though her sentence was reduced because she testified against David about the financial aspects of their plan. The divorce was finalized within 6 months, with David forfeiting any claim to our joint assets due to his criminal conviction for defrauding me. I retained full control of my trust fund life insurance and all property we had acquired during our marriage. The months following their arrests were a journey of healing that I never expected to take at 57 years old. The betrayal had cut deeper than I initially realized, not just because of what David and Sarah had done, but because of how completely they had made me doubt myself. The first step was physical recovery. Dr. Chen helped me detoxify from the haloperidol they had been giving me, and the headaches and dizziness that had plagued me for months gradually disappeared. I felt like I was reclaiming my own mind and body after months of being chemically manipulated. Michael struggled with guilt and anger that took time to work through. He blamed himself for not seeing the signs, for trusting Sarah's manipulation, for not protecting me from their scheme. We attended family counseling together, where a therapist helped him understand that he had been a victim of their manipulation, too carefully isolated from information that might have revealed their true intentions. Slowly, our relationship grew stronger than it had ever been. Michael moved back home temporarily while his divorce was finalized, and we spent hours talking about the family dynamics. He had missed the subtle signs of control and manipulation that had been invisible to him as they developed. "Mom, I can't believe I didn't see it," he said one evening as we worked together in my rose garden. "Sarah was so good at making her concerns about you seem like love and care. I actually thought she was the perfect daughter-in-law for being so attentive to your health." I reached out to reconnect with friends who had been pushed away during David's campaign to isolate me. Many of them had felt uncomfortable about being asked to limit contact with me, but had trusted David's explanations about my fragile state. Linda organized a gathering where I could explain what had really happened and thank them for being ready to support me when I finally reached out. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive. My story became known throughout our neighborhood, and I discovered how many people had noticed subtle changes in David's behavior over the past year, how he had become more controlling, more secretive, more dismissive of my independence. About 8 months after the trial, I met Robert at a community gardening workshop. He was a retired teacher whose wife had passed away 2 years earlier, and we bonded over our shared love of roses and our experience of having to rebuild our lives after devastating losses. Robert's companionship helped me remember that I was capable of trust, love, and happiness despite what I had endured. I returned to work at the library full-time, finding new purpose in my role, and eventually developing a support group for older women who had experienced financial abuse or family manipulation. My story inspired other women to recognize warning signs and seek help before situations became as dangerous as mine had been. The financial security my father's trust fund provided allowed me to travel for the first time in decades. I visited Margaret in Oregon, took a cruise through the Mediterranean, and even spent 2 weeks in Ireland exploring gardens and libraries. Each journey felt like reclaiming parts of myself that had been suppressed during the years of David's subtle but persistent control. Michael eventually met someone new, a colleague named Emma, who appreciated his protective instincts while maintaining her own independence. Watching him build a healthy relationship based on mutual respect and genuine communication gave me hope that the patterns of manipulation he had witnessed wouldn't define his future relationships. As I reflected on the experience, I realized that the warning signs had been present long before the commitment plot began. David's need to control small decisions, his dismissal of my opinions on financial matters, his subtle undermining of my confidence. These had been building blocks for the larger betrayal that followed. The most profound realization was that my strength had never actually left me. Even when they were drugging me, manipulating me, and systematically destroying my support network, some core part of me had recognized that something was wrong. My instincts had been trying to protect me, even when my conscious mind was clouded by their chemicals and lies. I learned to trust myself again, my perceptions, my memories, my judgment. The doubt they had planted so carefully was replaced by confidence built on surviving their worst intentions and emerging not just intact but stronger. Sometimes people ask me if I hate David and Sarah for what they did to me. The honest answer is that I've found peace in understanding that their actions reflected their own moral failures, not any inadequacy on my part. Hatred would have meant carrying their poison forward in my own heart, and I refuse to let them contaminate any more of my life than they already had. My advice to anyone facing betrayal, whether from family, friends, or partners, is this: trust your instincts, even when everyone around you suggests you're wrong. Document everything. Build your support network before you need it. And remember that surviving betrayal often reveals strength you never knew you possessed. The roses in my garden bloom more beautifully now than they ever did during my marriage. I tend them with hands that are steady, water them with purpose, and watch them flourish in soil that's been cleared of everything toxic. Sometimes the most beautiful growth happens after the deepest cutting away of what seemed permanent, but was actually poisoning everything around it. Today, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. And that's the greatest victory of all. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized someone you trusted was working against you? How did you find the strength to fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of courage and survival, and share this video with anyone who might need to know they're not alone in facing betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more resilient than anyone who tries to break you will ever understand.